Bye weeks, injuries, and the trade deadline got your IDP teams in a bind? Not to worry, because you found yourself the podcast that can help you out for your Week 10. Welcome to the IDP After Show Week 10 preview episode. I'm your host, Jeff Pomazal. This week, Jay Kohlhagen is joining me, and together we're going to be bringing you 6 players that were a little higher on this week than consensus, 6 players we're tempering our expectations on, and 2 players, after even all this time this season, we just don't know what to do with. If that sounds like something that you and your IDP teams could use, sit back, listen in, and let's get after it on this episode of the IDP After Show.
This is the IDP After Show.
All right, Jake, let's jump right into our players for Week 10. Let's start at the defensive line position. Who's a player you got for this week that you are a little higher on than consensus?
For me, we're going to head to the New York Giants. I really like Abdul Carter this week. He was on the receiving end of some great work by Brian Burns last week, getting an interception or fumble recovery. I don't know how they officially scored that, but regardless, he had a very great play. But when I look at what he's been able to do so far this year, on 266 pass rush snaps, he's generated 32 pressures to give us, just over 12% pass rush pressure rate. Very, very solid number, especially for a rookie. Even with the highest pedigrees he had, we love to see that type of performance there. The real key for me at this point is he's generating the pressures. It's just not fully translating into the production we have yet to or like to see for IDP. He's only produced 1 sack on the year. And when you look at the general rate at which players, when they generate that kind of pressure, what they should be at for sack totals, he should be already closer to 5 or 5.5 sacks on the year. So positive regression seems very much in line for his future. Then you look at who he's got on the other side of the ball with him this week in the Chicago Bears. Caleb Williams, well known for all the sacks he took last year. Bears did a lot to reinforce that offensive line, and we've seen Caleb only take 14 sacks this year. However, he still is holding the ball at a kind of absurd rate. When you look at any quarterback in the NFL with at least 100 dropbacks right now, his average time to throw is number 1, and not in a good way, at 3.31 seconds. So we're seeing him constantly try to extend plays and make plays happen. That's something that has been positive for them, and he's avoided sacks for the most part. But when you look at a team like the New York Giants and their pass rush and the pressures that they do generate, I think this is a week where we see Caleb Williams take a few more sacks, and I think we see Abdul Carter get to be the beneficiary of that.
I like this call, and he really seems to kind of not taken over Kayvon Thibodeau completely, because they're definitely putting all 3 of them on the field. They kind of got like that NASCAR package where they've got all 3 of them. They're moving them around the line, but it was kind of shocking that Kayvon Thibodeau maybe wasn't traded, or a little bit more he did. Maybe all of the draft picks went to the other New York team this week, but he definitely seems to be kind of the focal point of this defense kind of going forward. Obviously, Brian Burns is there on the defensive line, but he definitely seems to be a growing piece there, and I kind of like this call, especially against the Bears. Anytime we can get the sack of a Bear, it's always a good week, so I like that call. I'm going to go with to the Pacific Northwest for my first player here. Uchenna Nwosu is going to be my player. They get to play the Arizona Cardinals this week, and the Cardinals have made the move to Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, and Jacoby Brissett is not the elusive evader of sacks that Kyler Murray is, and so he's been sacked a plethora of times over the last few starts, and at least we're going to get 4 more starts with Jacoby Brissett, as Kyler Murray was moved to IR today. Uchenna Nwosu comes into this game with at least a half a sack or more in 5 straight games, so he's been kind of on a little bit of a run. Arizona just gave up 5 sacks this last week to Dallas, and Dallas has no one to get sacks. At least they did until this previous week when they made all the trades, but Dallas's defensive line was not intimidating at all, but they got 5 sacks last week. The defensive backs for Seattle are also getting healthier, which means that the wide receivers are kind of held in check a little bit longer, which gives those defensive linemen just a little bit more time to get to the quarterback. We saw Witherspoon come back last week, so that's kind of a helpful piece for that defensive unit as a whole. And I think game script is going to be in Nwosu's favor this week, as Arizona is probably going to need to throw the ball, as they really don't have a run game yet. Trey Benson's not quite back yet to 100% or being back in this game. but Seattle offense is just clicking right now, putting up a lot of points. And so I think Arizona is going to have to try to keep pace, especially in that West Conference. So let's fire up Nwosu to get 6 in a row this week.
No, I love the call out. I think it's a great look there. For me, I'm very interested in that matchup overall with the Seahawks, and so something we'll get into a little bit later, maybe in someone I'm not as excited to play.
It's interesting too, because this is such a like week to week league. It's not like an offensive kind of like where you can just kind of roll out your players every week. They're going to be regardless of matchup. A lot of these players that we're talking about, a couple of them we'll get to, they were on the fade list last week, and then because of matchups and things like that. But this week we're firing them up. And a couple of players that were on the fire up list last week now are on the fade list. So it's very like, week to week dependent. So I like that little tease that you threw in there, Jake, as far as like stay tuned for what's coming up. So let's flip to everyone's favorite position, the linebacker position. Who's a linebacker you have this week that you're kind of pumped about?
Yeah, very, very excited about Tatum Bethune from the San Francisco 49ers. So staying out west there, just traveling a little bit south from Seattle. Bethune has been just a tackle vacuum stepping in for Fred Warner. Obviously, the 100% snap rate, the green dot, the usage, all that is ideal. But what he's gone and done with that, right? So he currently has a league high 18.67 tackle rate. Again, this is among defenders or linebackers with a minimum of 100 snaps. So that alone right there has us very excited about him being in our lineups most weeks, if not every single week. This week, though, again, looking at the other side of the ball, divisional opponent in the Los Angeles Rams, when you look at what they do as an offense, right? So neutral game scripts and when they're running the ball at about a 37% clip, not the most ideal when you're trying to look to, pile up tackles in the run game. But when they do get outside of the neutral game script or a positive one, so they're up more than one score, they're running the ball almost 2/3 of the time. And the Rams are already 3.5-point road favorites in this game. I think this is something where the game script itself is going to set itself up for positive scenarios for Tatum Bethune to continue to pile up all those tackles for us. So obviously we love to see that from our linebacker position. However, the one things that I do want to call out is when the Rams are passing, Stafford is 10th in attacking the intermediate area of the field in terms of attempts and 6th in the short area. So again, these are areas where Bethune is going to be able to make his hay in terms of, being around the ball, rallying to the ball, and picking up even those assist tackles, which usually scored a little less for us, but nonetheless, still piling up those points for us. So whenever the game starts out and it's in a neutral script and they're passing more, I still think this is a positive matchup for Bethune. If the game gets out of hand or the Rams start to pull away, again, another positive game script or setup for Bethune. So really, I don't know how he's not a great play for us this week. I'm very excited and should be firing him up everywhere we can. The fun note will be is, we looked at all the things that that Stafford does passing the ball. He is second in play action attempts over the entirety of the season as well. So Bethune will have to be on top of his game to maximize his effectiveness for that Niners defense. But regardless for IDP, I'm excited for what Bethune's going to do this week.
Yeah, I'm excited for this play too, just because of the volume of plays that the Rams offense has been generating on the field. Near the top of the league as far as offensive plays run. And again, that's, when they get a positive game script, they're going to have the ball a lot, especially late in the games. I know that kind of inflates that a little bit, but they're an efficient offense. And so they're on the field quite a bit anyway. Puka Nacua sounds like he's going to be a go this week. So that's going to help the offense be even more sustainable. So maybe we'll get, a little more into the intermediate passing game, into the flats, using Kyron Williams out of the backfield, maybe hitting those tight ends a little bit, just like you had mentioned, right in that wheelhouse, that short to intermediate play. So I like it. We're going to go to the Cleveland Browns for the linebacker for me this week, and it's going to be Devin Bush. A little leery with the matchup this week just against the Jets, but the Jets have been the second best team for opposing linebackers for scoring this week or during the season. And, through 10 weeks of the season, we have a pretty good kind of feel of where we're at. I know last time we were on a show doing this together, Jake, it was week 1. And so we didn't have a lot of data to go on, but I feel that over the course of 10 weeks, we have a pretty good base of information to kind of go from. Now, this Jets team looks a lot different than it did just a week ago. But more of that was on the defensive side of the ball. There's probably not going to be Carson Schlesinger this week. He didn't practice today. Probably going to be sitting out with that ankle. And I know somewhere Mike Ward is probably crying and dying right now without Schlesinger and his defensive rookie of the year props and things like that. So I think Bush is in line for a ton of snaps this season. Bush has been on a nice little run so far this season. He is currently the LB5 according to PFF's overall ranking with an 84.4 grade. And I know that that's not the end all be all as far as like production, but it's going to keep him on the field. He's going to definitely be like where the efficiency piece is going to be. He's going to be making tackles. And without Schlesinger there, I don't see a lot of other competition for tackles this week. I know Mohamed Diabate is probably going to be a little favorite this week, but he's not quite the opposition for tackles that Carson Schlesinger is. So I think Bush is going to do very well in that department this week. So, the Jets offense is going to look a little rough this week, but I still think, Breece Hall is still on that team. They're going to run the ball a lot. And when he doesn't run the ball, he's going to get the ball short and intermediate. Garrett Wilson looked like he was limited in practice, so they're not probably going to be pushing the ball down the field very much. So just like the Rams using that short to intermediate passing game, if Justin Fields isn't running it, he's dumping it off to a tight end or running back close to the line of scrimmage. So fire me up some Devin Bush this week.
God, it's crazy to think back his career arc, right? To get to this point, what is it, like number 20 overall pick or something like that, or mid 20s to the Steelers. I think he had like a crazy rookie year where he had some huge splash, fluky plays that really kind of put him on the map a bit, and then just kind of fell off, and then injuries, and now a nice little recovery arc here for him, hopefully to maybe restore his career to what it once could have been. But great play this week, and kind of a fun story to see him get back to where he might have been, had his career stayed on track.
Was Devin Bush the guy when he was in college? He was on the 50-yard line, and he was like with his cleats like scarring up the logo of the opposing team. Was that Michigan State that they were playing, and he was like turf grinding like their logo or something like that? It seems like a very Michigan thing to do.
I want to say yes, but I'd have to validate that. But that sounds
okay,
spot on. So
don't fact check that one. Let's just go with it. And let's go on to your defensive back that you like this week, which is interesting because I had him as a fade last week. So who you got?
So we got Jesse Bates, the third, for the Falcons. So I mean, and it was a darn near perfect call for you last week, right? We talked about it before we even got on the show here that really saved his day with an interception, which, prior to this year, had kind of been Bates's calling card, a deep safety who really was a good ball hawk and could make a lot of plays or splash plays like that. So great for best ball formats, or, if you got big enough scoring, to really reward those types of plays or pass breakups. Well, it's been a little bit of I don't want to say career resurgence, but some sort of flip or change to his approach in his career. And he's really become this box heavy type safety. And so when you look at, I just call it ideal alignment for defensive backs, and that's where they're playing either as a box like a linebacker, or they're playing in the slot like a nickel defender, or just lined up along the defensive line in those different types of alignments, especially like in those cover zero type looks. He's spending darn near 2/3 of his snaps. So he's got just over 63% of his snaps in that ideal alignment. Now, when you go ahead and look at who they're playing this week, they're playing the Indianapolis Colts, and without fully updated numbers, the Colts last week were number one matchup for safety in terms of tackles. And then, even maybe with a less than ideal IDP outing for the Steelers safeties last week, I'm sure the Colts overall are still a top 5 matchup for that position. So I think Bates, with that ideal alignment and utilization there, the matchup for him, and maybe even a little bit of narrative street here, but that LB2 looks pretty in question at this point as far as the Atlanta Falcons go. So maybe that he gets a little bump from that and does a little bit more with it, because I mean, JT Bertrand just ain't it. And so, we'll leave it at that.
And last week I felt like I was a Bates hater just because he hadn't had that big week yet. And like you had mentioned, prior years he was getting sacks, he was getting interceptions, and to this point in the season he really wasn't doing that. And like you said, I almost had it spot on, and he had like 2 tackles I think in the game, and he got kind of, like you said, bailed out with an interception. But Indianapolis kind of looked beatable last week. Daniel Jones was responsible for 5 turnovers. And is this the Danny Dimes of old kind of resurfacing, or, is that just an anomaly, a hiccup in the week? Because that whole team kind of looked in disarray. Jonathan Taylor, for the first time all season, wasn't getting multiple touchdowns, wasn't running for over 100 yards. And I know this week they're in Germany. So, those early games, that's, there's something to be said for that. So, we'll see what this week brings.
Yeah, I think a lot of it had to do with turnovers in that game. So that's the big way to attack him. And Daniel Jones had turnover issues in the past, but a lot of that was he given enough to support himself? Well, they finally played a team who really capitalized or created a lot of turnovers and capitalized on that. And maybe that's just that team not being used to playing from behind, or that could just be their Achilles heel. So yeah, we'll see what it comes here with Atlanta, which is one of the best defenses we've actually seen this year, quietly under the radar. I don't think getting enough recognition for that.
Was not probably on anyone's radar as a top defensive unit going into this year, especially with all the glaring holes that they had along that defensive line generating pressure. I mean, they do have JD Bertrand there as a linebacker, so that kind of masks a lot of holes. So we'll go with that. Jake, where are you going? Come back. Okay. All right. We're not done with the show yet. We have one more defensive back that we like this week. Mine is going to be CJ Gardner-Johnson. This player has had quite the interesting season. I think this is his 3rd team that he's been on, and we're only in week 10. He immediately stepped in after signing. The Bears definitely needed, with the numerous players that they had on IR and are shuffling to IR as we speak still. Played over 60% of snaps this last week in his first time there. Of those 60% of snaps, we love to see that 90% of those were in that IDP sweet spot, which we just covet from our defensive backs, close to the line of scrimmage, playing in the box along that defensive line, which resulted in 6 tackles and a sack. So love to see that. And that's only on 60%. Definitely probably going to see that number grow as he gets a little more familiar with the defense, which is something which seems kind of interesting because he played for Dennis Allen before, and we know that that's an ideal play for him anyway. And so there really isn't probably a lot of growing pains for him going into that position. Like we mentioned, the defensive backfield for the defensive backs for the Bears have just been decimated with players on IR. I mean, I don't think they've had a week this year where they have everyone healthy for a week. And now, Tyreek Stevenson has been out. They just put Kyler Gordon on IR, so there's definitely going to be an opportunity for play here with CJ Gardner-Johnson. And getting the Giants, who are a sneaky good matchup for the secondary for some reason. I don't know how with all the injuries that they've sustained, but like we mentioned earlier, like it's week 10, kind of have to trust the data here a little bit and maybe go less from the gut and more from the head. So I'm going to go with my head call here, and CJ Gardner-Johnson is probably going to be like a top 24 play this week.
I love it. Yeah, Gardner-Johnson was someone as a Texans fan I was very excited about coming into the offseason, but was also very curious how they use him, right? Because Gardner-Johnson and Jalen Petrie became very redundant in terms of that defense, especially with what Gardner-Johnson want to do. Some of the rumors were, locker room chaos or whatever, but one of the biggest things out of that was he wanted to play more out of the slot, and he wanted to attack the line of scrimmage more. He felt that was the best use for him. Well, insert Dennis Allen and what he has always done with his slot defenders. That's exactly what he's going to do. And with Kyler Gordon going to the IR, this is an ideal fit. I don't know how long. I mean, obviously the minimum 4 for Gordon, but I don't know if this was season-ending IR for him or not. Kind of have to go back and look into that. And yeah, the biggest thing is he's going to make enough splash plays that even if he's getting, underutilized per se, not closer to that 80, 90% snap count, he can still make it worthwhile each week. But if he ends up being someone where they're like, hey, we want to find ways to keep him in here, for the run fit, for whatever else, and they're playing a ton of nickel, he could really end up making some huge noise and making be a huge second half IDP steal for us from the defensive back spot.
Yeah, Gordon is a 4-game minimum, but who knows what, we've seen players like that go on there before. We've seen players not go on IR and miss multiple games. Yeah. Yes, I'm talking about you, Bucky Irving. So let's get your butt back in the lineups. You have to be way too many shares of you. But anyway, this is an IDP show. So, Jake, we just covered our 6 players that we like more than consensus this week at the defensive line position. We've got Abdul Carter and Uchenna Nwosu. At our linebacker positions, we've got Tatum Bethune and Devin Bush. And defensive backs, we have Jesse Bates and CJ Gardner-Johnson. Flipping to the other side of the coin, Jake, now we're going to talk about some players that we're kind of maybe starting, but we're kind of tempering expectations on, maybe across the industry, that they're kind of being propped up a little bit by name value or maybe last week's performance. And as some of the players that we already mentioned in the players that we like, it's a very much a week-to-week league. And who's a player at the defensive line position that you're kind of pumping the brakes on a little bit?
Yeah, for this week, it's Khalil Mack for the Los Angeles Chargers. Huge respect, right? Nearly 35 years old, still doing some good work out there. But this week does have me just a little bit worried. When we take a look at his snaps per game last year, right? So again, yes, he is a year younger at that point, but not that far off. He was, getting nearly 40 snaps a game, just around 39 snaps per game. When we look at this year in games that he's playing, starting, more rotational, he's down to 25 snaps per game. I think the Chargers told us what they want Khalil Mack to be when they went out and traded for Odafe Oweh. They wanted to have greater rotation there. They have someone in Thule who can be more of that workhorse role, that can play the run, that can play the pass, that can be a 70-80% snap guy. Well, now they got 2 guys who are capable to deliver in terms of rotation between run and pass, so that they can just get these guys rest when they need it. And I really think that's just what we're likely to see. Now, this doesn't mean Khalil Mack is not usable. He's at a 13.18 pressure rate on pass rush, a 13.8 win rate. These are all solid numbers, right? Above average. But this week he's going to get the Steelers, who run the second fewest plays per game, just under 56 plays a game. Over the last 3, it's slightly up at 57. But their focus on the run and quicker passing game with Rodgers, who has a 2.5 second time to throw, which is one of the best. It might even be the best in the league. I didn't get my number down here, but regardless, at that quick of passing game, that limit of opportunities, I think that's going to leave Khalil Mack and maybe even the other Los Angeles Chargers in a little bit of a less than ideal matchup. But with Mack's snaps dropping the way they are, he becomes a lot more uncertain for me. And yeah, not someone I'm looking to fit into any of my lineups here.
And I know you kind of mentioned it with the amount of time that Rodgers has to throw, or how quickly he gets rid of the ball. Just his awareness too. We saw it versus the Packers. Like, he knew where Parsons was. Like, he said after the game, like, he heard the crowd react, so he knew that Parsons was right on his tail, and he threw the ball away. Even last week, when he was getting sacked and he threw that ball at the ground, and it was like initially called intentional grounding, but then upon further review, there was just that awareness from him. Obviously he's a first ballot Hall of Fame, so that kind of play. And like you said, getting limited snaps, he's just not going to, whether it's their game plan or them just bringing him slowly along from his injury, because he spent a little time on IR this season too for a couple of games to start the season. So is he slowly coming back? Is this the kind of play going forward? And just that matchup, like you said, Pittsburgh's kind of a boring offense to watch. They're not like glamorous, and they're not going to give him a lot of opportunity to get sacked. So good call. Although the Pittsburgh Steelers might be an entertaining sack fest to watch, because the left tackle position is kind of been a revolving door for Justin Herbert and the Chargers this season. So you got a call this week to play left tackle for the Chargers. Is that right? Yeah.
I don't know about that, man. I'd probably just look like a turnstile out there.
Well, it's kind of what they've got right now anyway. Turnstile Jake, isn't that? No, never mind. That's another story altogether.
That was my college years. We don't talk about that.
No, not all right. We're going to go to another defensive lineman to fade this week, and I got Jonathan Greenard, and this might be kind of a surprising call just because of how well he has been playing this season. how well he played last season, but this is kind of coming down to just efficiency and getting jobs done. He's got great PFF scores, but he only has 2 sacks this season on 33 pressures. If we compare that to the first 8 games or 9 games of last season he had 48 pressures and 7 sacks. So the pressure rate is down. The sack rate efficiency is down from last year. We know that Father Time's undefeated for a reason, but Greenard's not really in that conversation piece right now. He's still pretty young as far as defensive linemen go. He's nowhere near the Khalil Mack age. So for whatever reason, he's just not getting there this year. Eric Wilson, a linebacker, already has more sacks this season. He has 4 this season for the Vikings. So I don't know if it's a Flores defensive scheme change that the defensive linemen just aren't getting there and they're kind of using a little bit more of the linebackers. We saw Cashman last week kind of come back and kind of just reassert his dominance. It just doesn't seem like the defensive line. Maybe it's, the loss of Van Ginkel isn't there like it was last year, kind of drawing attention away, kind of freeing both of them up. But for whatever reason, just not a good matchup. And then we get the Baltimore Ravens, who are probably the toughest matchup for opposing defensive linemen this season. And I know we haven't had Lamar all season, but he's getting healthy. He's tough to bring down. He's a very elusive quarterback in his own right. Last week when they played Miami, and I know it's only Miami, but they only had 1 sack last week, and the player that got that sack is no longer even with the team anymore. So I just don't see that this being a good matchup for Greenard because he's not been efficient this year as it is. And then going up against Baltimore, I just not a very good week to get back on track, I don't think, for Greenard and the Vikings in the sack department.
Yeah, that's it's really funny for me to hear that and think about that because, again, as a Texans fan, right, Greenard cut his teeth there as a rookie in his first few years, got his opportunity with Minnesota. But especially in his years with Houston, he was massively just hyper efficient, right? He would have 15 pressures and like 7 sacks, right? Like just something crazy like that. Obviously that's hyperbole, but that's how the guy thrived. And, and then over years it became to be, okay, well, maybe that's just what he is. He's hyper efficient, right? So it's kind of ironic to me to see him be suffering from the other side of this coin finally, right? Where he's impacting the game in different ways, but not in the way that we like to see for IDP. So, yeah, I'm with you on this one for this week, and maybe he'll bounce back, but I just don't see it here in week 10.
And that's the hard part about these fades is because it's not like we don't. Like Greenard is probably still in your lineup because the tackle floor has been there. Like he's gotten 3, 4, 5 tackles a game. So the floor is there. We just don't have the ceiling that we're used to seeing or that we invested our draft capital in Greenard to have. If we compare to last season, he was twice the player at this point in the season last year than we are right now. And if you were drafting, in August for this year, like Greenard's probably going off the board as like a top 12, 15 defensive linemen, and he's nowhere near return on investment this season. And for whatever reason, maybe it's him, maybe it's the defensive scheme. Van Ginkel hasn't been the player that he was running with last year. So for whatever reason, it's just not there for him this year. So, and as a Packers fan, it's okay that the Vikings aren't being as successful, but that's another story altogether. All right, Jake, this one's going to hurt me because he's kind of saved a couple teams for me this year at the linebacker position, just been decimated with injuries. I was all excited for him this week, and then I saw him on the list as a player you're fading, and you just kind of rained on my parade. So let's hear it.
All right, so we're gonna go back to Seattle where you took us earlier, and I'm looking at Drake Thomas here for the Seattle Seahawks. I think he stepped up great in the absence of Ernest Jones with his injury. That's obviously a big question mark on how all of this looks. I just had to look now because I missed it from earlier in the day, but Ernest Jones was a limited participant here in practice for Wednesday. A really good sign for him to potentially be back out on the field and wearing that green dot, which means that ideal usage goes over to Ernest Jones, and Drake Thomas could slip a little bit in terms of, if Ernest Jones misses, he goes from 100% down to 95, 90, maybe down in the 80s even. Like, who knows? That LB2 has fluctuated a little bit this year. That always gives me a little bit pause to be too confident in that LB2 role. That said, Talking about Jonathan Greenard and his hyper efficiency, Drake Thomas has seemed to live on that hyper efficiency so far, and sometimes that's just a player's year, but other times, especially for players who are lesser known, I hesitate to lean into that too much. But we look at Drake Thomas, per PFF, he's already landed 3 sacks from only 8 pressures on only 35 pass rush opportunities. So that gives him a 23% pressure rate, where the league average for linebackers, with 100 snaps, is closer to 17%. League average for linebackers to land a sack is once every 34 pass rush snaps this year. Again, looking at those starting type linebackers, he's got 3 in within 35. So what it takes people to get 1 on average, he's already landed 3. So he's clearly at a point of overachieving in the sack department, which helps prop up our IDP scoring. And then you take a look, he's only got 28 tackles on 315 snaps. That's a sub 9% tackle rate. The league average floats closer to 12. While that doesn't seem like much over the course of a 60, 65, maybe 70 snap game, that 3% can make up the difference, when you're talking about adding on 2 more solo tackles or 3 more tackles throughout the game. So I love what Drake Thomas has done. I love that we've been able to find him on our waiver wires and inject him into the lineups for some success. I just am not as optimistic maybe as yourself and others that he can keep propping himself up with some of these other plays, or that he can be the tackle monster that we'd like to see, or even above average tackle, player for us to really justify his spot in our lineups. Now the caveat to all this is, and you talked about it earlier and you nailed it when you said, hey, they're playing a team that's got a little bit better offense now in Brissett, that's doing a little bit more, but also very immobile, right? Brissett's been sacked 13 times at only 131 dropbacks. So you're saying if they drop back to throw the ball 25 times, that's 2.5 sacks, right? Just simple math. That's not a direct correlation always, but it's just a generalization. But then you look at Brissett's got a time to throw of 3.1 seconds, the 4th longest in all of the NFL. So he feels very dependent on big plays. I understand people if they want to inject him into the lineup, because I think the big play could still possibly come this week. But I'm going to lean on the side of, regression to the mean here. And I think that he's, more in line with just an average performance than anything bigger.
Where are you comfortable starting him? Linebacker 4?
Yeah, in a 12 team league, absolutely. I think I would definitely
Okay.
be comfortable with that. Maybe even an LB3 level, depending on, just maybe your hands are kind of tied with bye weeks and all that stuff.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I just feel there is a lot of comfort that he could be like an LB2 or higher, or creeping up even more than that maybe. And that, to me, that's just not my comfort range. I'll inject volatility into my lineup when I know I have the floor to support that volatility.
And I think you nailed it when you talked about, Ernest Jones having limited practice on a Wednesday, which is great. A day when veterans usually get a day of rest, and especially one coming off of an injury. He's out there at least in a limited capacity. So that's a great sign for his availability this week. Seeing that, and then thinking about last year, Tyrese Knight, who had a great rookie season, really only was an 80% linebacker as the LB2 in Seattle. And this, like you said, if Jones is out there 95%, that means Thomas's snaps are only going to be capped. He's only going to be able to play a limited amount of snaps, because that's just what Seattle does, and so you take that into consideration with, the volatility and the not being a very sticky stat as far as getting interceptions or sacks, even though Thomas has shown he's super efficient. There's a regression at some point coming, and it very well could, start hopefully next week, but it could be this week.
Well, I'm playing against Drake Thomas in my home league, so maybe this is a little
this
bit
is
of wish
hopium.
casting then,
That's what this
right?
is.
Yeah.
This is hopium, Jake. Yeah, you're wishing voodoo on this boy. Come on, don't do that to my savior. All right, this one's gonna hurt almost worse than Drake Thomas, but linebacker that I'm kind of hesitant about this week is a little Quay Walker action. The tackle numbers have been super solid this year for him. He's already has 71 on the season, but the lack of big plays, the splash plays, those sticky plays that we were kind of talking just a minute ago, he only has 1.5 and nothing else. No interceptions, no passes defense. and that 1.5 sacks came against Arizona, like we were just kind of mentioning. But the entire Packer defense had a sack, I think, in that game because it was unbelievable the amount of pressure that was getting generated in that game. Where was it last week against Carolina? I don't know, but that's where we're at. Not only is Quay Walker's lack of big plays or splash plays kind of worrisome, but he also gets Philadelphia this week. And as efficient as that offense is, they are the worst matchup, and it's not even close for opposing linebackers this season. They're like giving up like single-digit tackle opportunities to the linebackers this year. And so when you already have a very efficient linebacker running mate in Edgerrin Cooper, your ceiling's already limited, and then throw on the fact that you're not getting any big splash plays. Unless the tush push turns into like a fumble Ruski play, we're not going to see that this week from Quay Walker. I probably still going to be starting him as probably an LB2 this week because that tackle floor has been good. But seeing him on Fantasy Pros right now as the LB11 this week just seems a little advantageous, especially with 4 teams on a bye. I understand that. But that just seems pretty high for being a player that's not going to have that ceiling that we like to have in our LB1s. I'm great starting him as an LB3, maybe LB2, but I really hesitate with him as my LB1 this week in a terrible matchup against Philadelphia. So, and having to wait till Monday night, it's just even more worrisome when you get there. Is that what you're going to say? I'm sorry.
No, it wasn't. But it's funny you say that. I'm always actually the opposite. I love having guys go on Monday night because I'd rather. It's like trying to hit the over on a prop bet, right?
Yep.
Versus like make sure the under stays. So I always want my player trying to surpass the other player's score or scores. So it's funny you say that. But no, what I was gonna say is it will be interesting to see how the matchup plays out, because you're absolutely right about what Philadelphia has been up to this point. But they have made some concerted efforts in terms of their play calling over the prior to their bye week, in how the formations they're running out of and the things that they're doing that are making them a little less predictable, which might allow itself for other players to be able to make plays on that. Because they were just, if they were under center, they were running the ball. If they were in shotgun, they were passing, and it was like at a 75% clip. And like the commentators and announcers in the games were talking about these things. And it's like, if they realize that, NFL teams are going to know exactly what they're doing. And that's your defensive line is going to win. Like if they can just pin their ear back because they know it's a pass, or if they can, make sure that they're in their rush lane because they know it's a run, like that's going to start to impact other things. Now that they're doing more, I'd be really curious to see how some of these games shake out. Obviously, that's not me saying you're wrong. Quay Walker's a great start. It's just one of those things where we do want to look at the data and use it to our ability, but sometimes some of those things can shift, even in the small of the season that we have in the NFL. And it tends to fluctuate around the bye week. So just something I find interesting based on what you were talking about.
And one more thing with the game too, Philadelphia runs the ball a lot. The clock is running. The over under is at 44 points this week. It's one of the lower totals on the slate. So, is this almost kind of a limited snap opportunity for the Packers defense? I know that Philadelphia's offense has been very prolific this season. Maybe the reason Packers looked so bad last week in Carolina, they were kind of having that trap game mentality. They were looking ahead to this game. It's a big game. It's on Monday night, televised. Everyone's going to be watching. So I can see that being a thing. But yeah, I don't know. Quay Walker's just kind of, let's get a little more in the big play snaps. In this year, in the contract year too, he's looking for that big payday. You'd think, if he's going to be able to do it, this would be the year to get it done.
Agreed.
We're all in that big payday year. So moving to the defensive back position, Jake, who is that defensive back that you are like, this is probably a little too high this week for me?
Yeah, so for me, that comes on the back of an amazing performance for him, Cole Bishop of the Buffalo Bills. Just a fantastic output last week. I believe 26 points in Big 3 scoring. But when I look at his body of work for the season, just not amazing alignment or sweet spot utilization like you talked about, right? It's sitting around 44%. Not terrible, but Also just not that great. A below average tackle efficiency on the year at 8.17%. Now, not too far below that for safeties. You know, we like to see that float a little closer to 10. But 8 still just kind of that step down from what we'd like to see. I just expect that we're going to see a bit of regression back to the mean here for him, right? He had some big plays. You know, he had a little more tackles than he normally does. And now he gets a matchup here against the Miami Dolphins. They're one of the other teams with the fewest plays ran per game in the NFL, down at 56. We've seen a nice little uptick here over the last 3 at 61, but I do expect that it was more of the case of who they were playing in those given situations. Whereas here, now they're playing Buffalo, who is 9.5-point road favorites. I think it's pretty fair to say we could expect a pretty solid run game here, especially from Joe Brady, who is definitely someone who tends to favor more run-heavy game scripts, at least especially compared to what we see versus other NFL teams. Tua is someone who is 22nd in terms of all active quarterbacks and 20-plus yard throws downfield, where, you know, that's where 56% of his alignment is coming, is in that deep utilization. So I just don't see where Cole Bishop is going to get a ton of opportunities. Again, he can pull a Jesse Bates last week, pile up two tackles, and find a way to make, you know, a splash play to save his week overall. But just in terms of what we've seen this year, what this matchup looks like for me, I think this is something where, you know, he's probably going to give you 3-4 tackles, and that's probably going to be the game for him. So I'm hesitant to plug Cole Bishop into my lineup. You know, anything higher than a defensive back 3 is really kind of pushing it for me. Probably looking more in that, you know, 4 range.
So Jake, you kind of teased it out here a little bit. You kind of said, let's get a couple tackles, maybe like he'll pull a Jesse Bates, get a couple tackles and a pick to save his week. Is a couple tackle and a pick a 10-point game? Is that saving your week? I mean, are you winning from a player like that? You know, like if you have a league that starts 2 defensive backs, that's not winning you your week, right? I mean, that's not the kind of the upside that you're looking for. And especially from a player, you know, like I know we're riding Bates here a little bit, but he was drafted pretty highly in the defensive back position, you know, and if to get 10 points and to just get 10 points, you know, and like if you say Bishop, where are you comfortable with him? Like leagues that start 3, 4, you know, defensive backs or not even there.
It would, I could see as a DB4 for sure. Like that's I got a level of comfort with that. You know, if again you want to play into the variance, Tua leads the NFL in interceptions. So we say, I think, you know, the alignment or the utilization doesn't align well for him to make a lot of plays, but the chances for some bad plays to be made are definitely there based on who's on the other side of the ball. I just don't want to lean into variance too heavily with those things. I want to find the guys that have strong utilization, you know, that are going to give me the better possible floor every week. Right now, I agree, right? 10 points is not going to be week winning, but if I can avoid, you know, taking 2 or 3 points in a lot of my spots because, you know, I'm not worried about trying to get the interception or several pass breakups, you know, these splashier plays for my DB. If I can find the guys who are going to consistently give me 8, 9, 10 points as a floor based on what they can do in the tackle game, well, then now I can interject some volatility on top of that. And now when they make that splash play, they land a sack, they recover a fumble, you know, get some recovery yardage, whatever it is. Okay, well, now they're 15, 16, 17 points or more. And that's the stuff that starts tipping the scale in your favor in a week-to-week matchup.
Yeah, I think we get in trouble when we start chasing sacks, when we start chasing interceptions. You know, like let's leave that to the professionals. Let's leave that to Johnny the Greek. Read his cornering the cornerback article. If you want to chase, there's the guy to chase with it, because that guy does some crazy things on the defensive back side of the ball. So
agreed.
My defensive back to fade this week is probably a tough one for many listeners, is Budda Baker. Talked about Greenard having a down season. Budda Baker is having a tough season this year. 56 tackles and 1 fumble recovery on the season. 6 of his 8 games that he's played this year in Big 3 scoring have been single-digit games. And last week with the fumble recovery, he just barely got over 10 to make that not 7 of 8 games. I think he was like at 10.8 points, so just barely over. So like we just mentioned, like that's not week winning numbers, especially from a defensive back that probably went 1, 2, 3 at the position in drafts. That's just not what you expect from Budda Baker. I think some of the issue is he's having a little more solid linebacker play in front of him this season. So last year we saw a lot of those plays getting to that second, that third level where Baker was kind of playing at. And this year he's just not getting the opportunities that he had gotten in the past. And I know I've been hammering this drum about matchups, but this week he gets a bottom 3 matchup with the Seahawks. They're just not great to opposing safety positions. Last week, the secondary for the Washington Commanders had 2 players in double-digit scoring. One was Mike Sanistril, who had an interception and had 11 points. And then Jeremy Reeves had just 10 points. So again, we look at these matchups. We look at, 10 weeks of work. Now we kind of have this data going for us. Budda Baker's having a down season as far as Budda Baker standards go. He has a tough matchup where we just saw a team that had a ton of opportunities because the Seahawks were going up and down the field on the Commanders on Monday night. Didn't have many players get over barely 10 points. I just think I think sometimes we make this game harder than it needs to be. And if we just look at the data where we're at, and if you remove Budda Baker's name from it, it's a no question. He's probably not in your lineup, but because it's Budda Baker, it's a really tough sit. And I'm going to probably be sitting in a couple leagues where I have him just because I think there's better matchups out there. If I'm kind of handcuffed, I know we have 4 teams on a bye this week, but if I have like my DB3, DB4 spot, maybe as a flex option, Baker, but I don't know. He's tough to start the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's spot on. I mean, you look at the years he's been one of the top tackling players in the NFL, not just safeties, right? Like that's the type of stuff he's able to, or the level he's able to perform to. But yeah, just not there this year. I'm not certain fully as to what it is either, right? I mean, utilization seems good enough that he should be able to make plays. The defense seems to be out there delivering. Maybe it's just the way Gannon and Nick Revis, run this stuff. But yeah, it has not been a good year for him. And, you can only lean into namesake so long before the numbers, beat you over the head and say, hey, this just ain't it.
Yeah. And I know he was drafted, I know in the D-up drafts and things like that, very few defensive backs got drafted, maybe a handful, maybe, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 6 or 7 names, 6, 7 names got drafted. But he was one of those defensive backs that maybe was picked. And talk about a tough pick, a wasted pick. So do your girls do a lot of the 6, 7 stuff? Do you got, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Try
to do it as much as I can.
Try being an elementary teacher right now and opening up to any page or any like practice problem that has the number 6 or 7 in it. You just lose it. It's tough. It's a tough world out there. So
yeah. No, I coach a 5th grade girls basketball team. We were talking about it earlier, right? And so we'll be doing warm-ups and they're counting, during their stretching, like 5, 6, 7, and then they all just start laughing and then they do this, right? And then I count it up in my head every time. And then at the end of practice, I'm like, okay, well now we're gonna run 15 lines because you did 6, 7, 15 times, and I told you we're not gonna be doing that here. And they're like, oh man.
It's tough too. If you got, dribbling's tough. If you every 6 dribble, you're picking up both of your hands and you're getting a traveling call or a double dribble call or whatever it is. So it makes it even worse. That's tough. So, all right. So just recapping the players that were fading this week, like we said, it's a week-to-week league. You got to stay on top of these kind of things. A lot of these players were on the flip side of the episode last week. Khalil Mack and Jonathan Greenard are our defensive linemen to fade this week. Drake Thomas and Quay Walker. Maybe we're hesitating a little bit on at the linebacker position. Cole Bishop and Budda Baker are our defensive backs to fade. Before we end the show here, Jake, we're going to wrap it up with a player that through 10 weeks, for whatever reason, coaching philosophy, snaps, whatever it is, efficiency, that we just can't figure out why they're not performing like we think they should be. And I know this has been a player that's been kind of a lightning rod player this year because he was expected to be doing some great things this year. We saw a lot of great things at the end of last season, but who's that player that just is like, got you scratching your head?
Well, I I feel bad because I'm repeating myself now. Week 1, this is exactly what I talked about then. And here we are 9 weeks later, still wondering, or at least I am. So we're going to Miami with the Dolphins and Chop Robinson. Obviously, Chubb being healthy, Phillips being healthy, and Phillips looking good, especially in terms of his underlying metrics. Really thought, okay, well, Chop can still work his way in. Chop can still be rotational. He showed that he can do some pretty solid things metric wise as well as production wise in the second half of last year with less than ideal usage and closer to that 30 40 50% snap rate, instead of that 60 70 80% that we love to see. 60 70 so yeah, I he's got the playing time opportunity now with the clear path with Phillips gone. But he's only a 10% win rate. He's only had 111 pass rush snaps over these first 9 weeks. I mean, a 8% pressure rate. I don't know, man. I've lost a lot of the optimism that I had coming into the year. This is I hate to cut bait on someone only 2 years into their career, but at the same point in time, we only get so many roster spots and we have to have people who can be productive for us at some level, whether that's even just injury or bye week fill in. And if he doesn't show something here for us over the second half here, I got to think he's someone that's droppable on your dynasty rosters. And you got to look for someone that could actually contribute for you because there's just no consistency here to do that or deliver that for us. And then the flip side of that is, Jalen Phillips' departure. What does that look like for him now? Going into a much more stable environment. He's got a back end of that defense that actually is talented. So now can those underlying metrics that, said there could be so much more with Jalen Phillips, do we actually get to realize that and see that? So a little bit of a twofer there in terms of players that I'm just not sure what the second half of the season holds for us.
We just need to see a healthy Phillips. I think we've gotten robbed from, a player that barely came in out of college playing the position. I think he only played the defensive line position like a couple years at the end of his college career and just was like a really ascending talent. But we've just been robbed of not being able to see like a full season, a full healthy season with him. And hopefully we get to see that in Philadelphia. Not that we wouldn't need to see a great Philadelphia defense, but I think for IDP, I think just having a healthy contributing Phillips would be fun for IDP. Do you think that Robinson maybe is a player that needs to be on the field more and, only getting limited snaps? He just kind of takes himself out of the game, but maybe a player that is going to be needed more on the field, more getting more snaps, kind of gets more involved in the game flow. Is that a possibility for Robinson kind of going forward?
I mean, that's kind of the hope, right? Because again, looking at last year, he was able to produce without being an elite level snap volume type player, both from production and just the metrics that, like PFF metrics. I don't know. I don't know what it is about the second year regression, or sophomore slump that we're potentially looking at here. But Miami is also pretty enigmatic overall as a whole, as far as an organization and culture, right? Like there's so much there that just, I don't know. So maybe I'm a little harsh in saying cut bait with him if he has a poor showing in the second half here, because maybe it is something to do with the organization and coaching. And that's something, just sorry to go on a super tangent here, but I don't think that gets enough credit sometimes, how impactful the coaching and alignment to player talent and utilization really is in the NFL, because you have so many players, so many variables on every single play, 60 times a game, right? It's like,
Yep.
yeah, I think sometimes we're too quick to just write people off and not consider all the factors that could potentially be in at play. Not that we should be apologists for everything either, though.
Right. You kind of seem like you're on the outside of Robinson. If you're a team or a manager that feels like good things are coming, this is maybe the buy time, if you're kind of feeling that way. It might be a tough buy. It might be the worst buy time right now, just because if there is any hope with Phillips being gone, this is going to be his chance. What would you be willing to acquire Robinson for, as far as like draft capital or a player swap kind of deal?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm looking for, I have a pretty solid team, and I don't need, I'm not like in dire straits at defensive line. It's more kind of an upside swing play like that. I'm definitely putting fourths out there to see what people say. A third feels a little rich for me, right? I mean, you can definitely find starting IDP talent in the third at times in rookie drafts, depending on how the offensive stuff breaks down. But yeah, I'm definitely throwing force out there to see what I can get for Chop Robinson in terms of buying. And selling. I don't, again, if I had him on my roster, I'm not going to sell him, because this is the time where he's going to have
Yep.
a full runway to say, here's what I am, here's what I can do.
Yeah. It would have been like week 6 would have been a great buy time when he was down on snaps, down on production. Now would be probably the hard time to buy. Hopefully there's a reason that he's going to be a tough buy and things get kind of turned around for him, because I know a lot of analysts were kind of high on him. I know that he went in several times in those D-up drafts as like that 6th round pick, just that dart throw at the end. Hey, let's try to hit lightning in a bottle. So I'm guilty of that a couple times too. So
me as well.
You actually turned me on to him, so then I'm blaming you. So my 28 D-up drafts that aren't doing well, that's all your fault, Jake. So
all you need is one to just be perfect. Because
just one, baby.
If we do look at the D-up leaderboard right now, who is number 1 overall in points through 9 weeks?
I think it's the guy on the left-hand side, but then who's the guy in second place?
Second place.
It's the guy on the right-hand side.
Just the first loser, man. If you ain't first, you're last. Ricky Bobby, come on, you know this.
I'll take $1,000 second place loser. I mean, sign me up all day. That's the best losing I've ever done in my life, Jake. You had kind of mentioned this with Chop Robinson about just the culture in Miami being kind of down, and it kind of brings everyone down. If there is a worse culture right now in the NFL, it's probably the Jets. And a player that I'm kind of like shaking my head on right now, like I just can't figure out what's going on with him, the coaches or whatever it is it's Quincy Williams. So far this season, I know he's been hurt. He only has played in 4 games this season, but 3 of them have been double-digit scoring games. He has 22 tackles and 1.5 sacks through those 4 games. That's pretty efficient as far as a player that's coming off of an injury. Reports are coming out today that he lost his starting job. Clearly, this team is dysfunctional. They benched Jamien Sherwood last week for a quarter. I still don't know the rhyme or reason behind that. If they were so out on Quincy Williams, why not trade him at the deadline to get anything for him? Throw him in a deal with clearly Dallas was looking for linebackers. Throw him in the deal with Quinnen Williams. Get rid of both Williamses at one time, Quincy and Quinnen, and then clearly the Jets were all in on getting draft picks. So even if you're getting like a 6-7 swap or something like that for him late, there we go again. But it just seems like for a team that was on like a fire sale, not to get rid of players that they're out on, it just didn't make sense to me. And so we've seen Quincy Williams be very fantasy relevant for several seasons. It looked like at times in stretches this year, he was, early in the season, the first 3 games, he played really well, scoring pretty solid for our teams, and then just got hurt. And then now came back, played pretty well last week. And then, now we're going to bench you. So I don't get it.
Yeah. It boggles my mind for sure. Right. They're 1-7. Like I get it if they're like, okay, the defensive structure is not what we want, right? I just talked about coaching and personnel aligning and being in sync. And if that's the case, okay, I respect that. You're the coach. You got to make the decisions that you think are right and best for that. Obviously you should try to utilize your talent the best way you can. But then if they're going to turn around and bench this guy who was a previous All-Pro, right? Like we're not even talking these fluffy Pro Bowl stats where it's like, oh, he, the 17 other linebackers in front of him declined going to the Pro Bowl, so he became the 18th alternate, and now he gets to have Pro Bowl in his, the back of his football card. No, like this guy was a legitimate first-team All-Pro. That stuff just doesn't happen by luck or fluke, right? The guy clearly has talent and capability. So the fact that they didn't go out there, package them with Quinnen, right? Hey, we got brothers for you, literal.
Right. Buy one, get one.
Right. Buy one Williams, get one. And it just, I don't know. the dysfunction in that organization. Well, it starts at the top. I'm not a big Woody Johnson fan, so we'll leave it at that. But yeah, I feel bad for the guy because he was such a fun story, from coming into the league, pretty much a no name, not getting a shot, works his way onto the roster with the Jets, becomes a Pro Bowler, becomes All Pro, like gets the big contract extensions, for their position. And yeah, to have it kind of come down like this is disheartening overall.
Well, and just thinking about like what that team did in the last 48 hours, they traded Sauce Gardner, they traded Quinn Williams away. Players are clearly wanting out. Breece Hall, like for the last several weeks, has very much made it publicly known that he is ready to go to anybody, and for like to being like for a 3rd round pick for him, and not a team in the NFL not wanting to pull the trigger on a 3rd round pick. Your Houston Texans, like, they could definitely use a player like Breece Hall. Like that would be a great get for a team and a third, like that seems like, a late day pick. Like take a gamble, especially as we've seen the resurgence at the running back position, where we've seen linebacker or running backs go in the first, 10 picks in the NFL draft the last couple of years. Like, a 3rd round pick for a player of Breece Hall's caliber just seems like, yeah, let's take a chance. So
yeah,
but again, we're an IDP show, so we try to be. So Jake, before I let you go, what are some like words of wisdom that you have as far as like this time of year that you've been using, whether on teams that you're contending or maybe in that rebuild? What's your philosophy at this time of year for teams?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing at this point is, you really need to understand what your league is about, or what the league mates you have, what they're trying to do, right? Because obviously you have an idea of what you want to do, but you need to understand what the other teams are doing. Because all of a sudden, if you're looking like, hey, I'm a fringe playoff team, but I got some teams that are maybe selling or looking to go, all in. Where do I land in this, right? Am I one or the other? Because if I go in with this middling team, I get it. You can make the playoffs and anything can happen. And I think there's a very real stance to that. But don't live in the middle, right? Like that's the biggest thing I can say is make a clear decision. I'm out on this season, and so now I need to be doing everything I can to make my team better from that standpoint, so that's, hey, I'm going to go acquire some injured players, right, that are at a lower cost and bring them in, and I can store them on my IR spots. Hey, I'm going to be just so crazy on the waiver wires, right? Like I'm going to win all the people ahead of time. I'm going to get all the right handcuffs, and then you can start selling things for more capital or whatever it is, win your league that way, right? Because you're setting yourself up for success down the road. And on the inverse, if you're like, hey, I have a team that compete, I know I can, I just got to get there, make all the right moves. You need to be looking at what playoff matchups look like for your fantasy teams. Who's got the best lineups, right? Who's going to go ahead and they're going to have, 3 or not 3, but like 5 top 5 matchups that come into the playoff stretch for their position group. And it's like, okay, well, this is great. Now I want to go acquire this guy before they start to go off and can make a big push for me in the playoffs. So it's really make that decision, understand what your league is doing and where you fall within that, pick your lane and stick with it and win your league, whether it's for next year with the right moves or whether it's planning for this year's playoffs.
I love this philosophy, Jake. And I want to add one more thing to this is be the first team to make the move, because that's when you're going to be able to get the most return on your players. Like if you're a team that right now, we're heading into week 10, if you're a team that's 4-5, yeah, I've got a chance to make the playoffs. I've had a couple of injured players. If they come back healthy, I have a chance. If you play the if game, you're going to lose. And so if I'm a team that I'm counting on an if player to come back, I want to be the first team to sell, because what that's going to do is I'm going to get the biggest return on a team that wants to buy. If you're already like 2 or 3 teams have already cashed in, the teams that are buying are already spent their capital. They've already either gotten rid of the players that you're interested in acquiring, or they've gotten rid of their draft capital for 2026. So you're already missed out. So now not only do you get less of a return on the players that you're trading away, you're kind of losing, and you're still like not helping your team for 2026 as much as you could have if you would have been, you know what, I'm just going to suck it up. This is not the year for me. I got 4 guys on IR. I'm going to grab a couple more and I'm going to trade off the players that are going to be an asset to another team, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Our players tonight, when we were talking about players to fade, looking at a Quay Walker, looking at a Budda Baker, like if week one, when we were sitting here, 10 weeks ago, those players were nowhere near on the fade list. They were near the start list. They were at top 10, top 15 at their position.
Plug and play.
Budda Baker was probably a top 3. Yeah. I mean, here we are. It's a crazy, crazy league. So, all righty, sir. Before we put a ribbon on this episode, I know that you did a ton of heavy lifting with, a lot of the D-up stuff, preseason, a lot of the drafts, things like that. What are you working on right now? And then where can the audience find some more of your work, and what can we expect from you in the off season?
Absolutely. Yeah. During the NFL season, not as active, tend to hop into some of these episodes here. So you can always kind of keep an eye on Twitter for different episodes that I'm doing. But really the big thing is getting into the off season, going to really dive deep into those best ball drafts again. Some different combined best ball style drafts that our good friend Scott runs, Professor IDP. And really focus on those things. And for that, obviously you're in the off season, so then you're looking at all the rookies and those things. So really it's diving into the off season cycle and focusing on those things, and really just getting ready for, building out that best possible roster for us, whether that's a best ball one or a redrafts or a dynasty. So.
Yeah, and you and Scott were amazing. That run of episodes that you guys did late July and through August, like kind of prepping strategy. Is it a linebacker build? Is it a defensive lineman build? Those are fantastic episodes. And even if you don't buy into that philosophy, just thinking about it a different way, or just going about, just being like kind of made aware of a different approach, can only help you grow as a IDP manager. So, just keep doing the things that you're doing, because it's fantastic stuff, Jake.
I appreciate it, Jeff. I mean, you as well. Hey, talk about heavy lifting, man. The IDP Minute, the after show, you keep everything plugging along here for us to keep us all well informed and making, well, what we hope are the right decisions at least. So,
well, like we're gonna have some hits. Obviously we got a lot of great information. We got a lot of great like teammates that were, literally, every position we've got somebody who does like focusing on that. Scott with the defensive line, he's got his, streaming article. He's got like just the deep analysis and the hits that he has with those kind of players, like players that are like rostered in like 3% of leagues. Like, this is the guy you want to start this week. Alex Wright was a couple weeks ago. The guy went out and had like 2 sacks, and things like that in the game. We already mentioned Johnny with the defensive back stuff, and obviously we got the Green Dot King with a linebacker. So literally any position that you need help with, the IDP show has it covered for you all season long. It's not just a preseason thing. It's like every day of the week, something new is dropping. So make sure you follow that every single week.
Agreed.
That's going to do it for this episode of the IDP After Show. I want to thank Jake again for coming on, sharing some of the fantastic knowledge that he has about the game that we all love. Be sure to follow him and look for his work, especially in the off season, if you like winning. So speaking of following, like I mentioned, if you're not doing so already, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so you're always made aware of all the great IDP content that is constantly dropping here at the IDP show all week long. Join me next week as Thomas Simmons joins us on the show as we break down the Week 11 landscape from an IDP perspective. Jake, can you believe it's going to be Week 11 already next week?
I cannot.
It's crazy. It just felt like 10 weeks ago we were doing the Week 1 preview. So, until then, for Jake and myself, we say thank you for joining us. Best of luck to you and your teams in Week 10, and take care.
This was the IDP After Show.